Hello and welcome back to another episode of Open Floor. I'm Andrew Sharp, and live in the office with me, Ben Golliver. What's up, man?
Not too much, Andrew. I just made the walk into the beautiful studios here, and every single person I saw didn't even say hello. They're just like, did you see what DeRozan tweeted? Did you see what DeRozan tweeted? What a life I live.
Yeah, it's great. This is a good week. We're both in New York for preseason NBA meetings, and we've got the top 100. Unfortunately, we can't talk about the top 100 today because Ben is very strict about the way we handle the rollout, and the top 20 has yet to be revealed as of today.
Look, you're pretty bad at pitching, okay? This is a huge project. We've got Rob Mahoney locked in as a special guest for later in this week, where we will take all questions, all comers on the top 100.
And until then, it is top secret.
Yes.
Okay, so for now,
we're building suspense.
It's Tuesday afternoon, and if you haven't seen it already, go see numbers 100 through 30, and then the top 20, or I guess the top 30 is going to be revealed the next couple of days here. And yeah, DeRozan has already expressed his displeasure. I agree with him. I think it's complete bullshit that he's ranked behind Chris Middleton, but it's a textbook Golliver take. You did not troll as hard with the Melo ranking, and I appreciate that. I feel like Carmelo, I think ESPN had him at like 65 or something, and he's sort of the new Kobe, where people go out of their way to like trash him in a way. He's the page views machine.
Yeah, I mean, I only know one ranking, so I don't even know what you're talking about in terms of this otherworldly thing that you're mentioning. But no, I mean, we have him where he should be. We have all these players exactly where they should be, and we'll talk about it later this week.
Good.
But, let's talk about some MVP odds. I think that you had sent them to me at least 90 seconds before we started today.
Right.
And you want to debate them. I think you had a column which I didn't read. I'm sorry. So you're going to have to summarize the column for me like I'm a third grader. In terms of what your take was, but what jumped out to you?
No, I think since we can't talk about the top 100, we're going to run through just MVP odds. I'm curious what your take is.
No, I just asked you what your take is. You can't just spin it back to take my take.
All right, well,
give your take.
Let's run through top to bottom some of the odds that jumped out at me.
Okay.
The first two that jumped out are Dirk Nowitzki at 500-1 and Dwight Howard at 500-1.
Burn your money. I don't think we need to even discuss
But can
that.
we talk about how depressing a Dwight Howard MVP season would be?
Not even his direct family members are voting or spending money to bet on him.
Like, how many superstars would have to be maimed for Dwight to win MVP at this
No, there
point
would
in
need
his
to be,
career?
like, how they're talking about lottery reform? There would need to be a complete rewriting of the rule book. Like, if they just basically said, three-pointers were no longer a thing. You could only play players who are 6'10 and taller. I mean, you would have to really alter the basketball landscape for Dwight to even be in the top 20. Let alone the top 50.
Think about how bad it would be for the sport. Like, every year we talk about doomsday scenarios with finals matchups. Like, imagine if this year's Charlotte Hornets were the premier team.
God. You know what would happen? I would sound like Mark Jackson did a few years ago when he was complaining about Steph Curry's impact on youth and the young people. All these guys just want to swing their elbows like Dwight. All they want to do is barely get off the ground for their dunks like Dwight. Where is the sport going? I would lose my mind. That'd be really bad for the aesthetics. It actually kind of reminds me of like a pre-shot clock era. Like he might not have even been MVP over a guy like Mikan. I mean, I don't know where we could fit 2017 or 18 Dwight into the MVP conversation.
It's pretty incredible because like 5 years ago, Dwight was legitimately in the mix every year for MVP.
I would say it's almost been 6, 7. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
time flies.
We
man.
talked about Roy Hibbert's on the last podcast. He's sort of taken that trajectory.
He's Roy Hibbert with a K.
The flip side, the timeline for Dirk winning MVP is the best possible NBA season imaginable, other than Westbrook and Paul George getting traded to the Cavs.
Yeah, okay, by the way, can we talk about that thing that because I did not come back nearly hard enough at you. Basically, what you did was you fracked the Thunder's roster. Like, you went in there, broke all the EPA regulations, all the things that would normally oversee how a team is built and maintained, and you just completely threw it out the window, scrapped it. Now we've got earthquakes left and right. I mean, basically what you did was you took two of the top contenders, I would say challengers to Golden State, you meshed them together in a completely favorable alignment, and you still didn't necessarily convince me that they would be able to beat Golden State in the finals.
I'm just making the most of the resources we have, you know? We're going to come back to that trade because I still am a believer to some extent.
Yeah, okay.
But, all right, moving on in the odds. We started out with just wasting everyone's time for a few minutes there.
Can you just read the odds first? I mean, KD and LeBron are the favorites.
Ben Simmons is 75-1. Damian Lillard is 75-1. I think that's psychotic. I cannot believe that Ben Simmons has better odds than like Draymond. He has better odds than Jimmy Butler right now. And I'm getting these from sportsbook.com. But Lillard at 75-1 is like a pretty decent long shot. And
Steve Kerr agrees with you. He floated him last year. That didn't quite go so well.
There were about 5 days at the beginning of last year's season when it looked like Lillard could make a little bit of a run. But yeah, the Sixers continue to get way too much love from Vegas. Joel Embiid is 50-1.
Can I ask you, because you actually gamble, right?
Yeah.
Is the love from Vegas reflecting just a few Sixers weirdos betting huge amounts of money on their favorite players? Is that the only reason why he's at 75-1? Like, is the threshold so low here that nobody bets on these guys who basically aren't the top 5 players? Because why would you ever bet on them? That if one guy goes into Las Vegas and is like, I'm going to bet $5,000 on Simmons, all of a sudden he appears for everyone on the list.
So yes, I think.
Do you know that person?
No.
Is he Spike or Mike?
It could be Spike or Mike. It might have been Mike Levin out in Vegas this summer. No, I do think it's tricky because I bet, but I don't actually understand Vegas.
Oh, perfect. You're the ideal person to be hosting a conversation like this.
My amateur analysis is that they set those odds in order to bait like rabid Sixers fans into throwing down like a stray $20 here on Ben Simmons to win at 75-1. Still, completely ridiculous. But moving on to more realistic candidates, the field that I would say here, like the real contenders: James Harden at 10-1, Giannis Antetokounmpo at 10-1, Anthony Davis at 20-1, John Wall at 50-1, LeBron James at 5-1, Kyrie Irving at 25-1, Steph Curry at 15-1, Jimmy Butler at 100-1, Kevin Durant at 5-1, Kawhi Leonard at 6-1. So of those names, who jumps out at you?
Steph Curry.
Right? 15-1 is high.
Wait,
for him.
do we agree?
I mean, it depends on what your take is.
Well, my take is I'm a little nervous about how much fun he had this summer because it seemed like he got the contract and he did let loose finally. I think he was on his very best behavior, like Homes and Gardens, let's get Aisha, a couple of TV shows, and a few magazine covers, best behavior, and then all of a sudden we start seeing Steph, drinking with frat guys and smoking cigars and doing the things that we know he does and every NBA player does, and yet he had done an immaculate job of sort of hiding from the public.
Okay.
That has me a little nervous. I mean, I don't think he's going to come back, 15 pounds over shape.
See, this is why I didn't blind agree with you, because my take is not I'm worried about Steph.
I'm just prefacing this by saying he is kind of in line for a letdown year because it's the first year after the contract. That is a phenomenon that basically affects people, across the spectrum. It could be stars, it could be average players, could be below average players. At the same time, no one has figured him out yet. They're going to win a ton of games, and I firmly believe that the best player on the best team should always be a leading MVP candidate. I still think that's Durant for the Warriors, but if he gets injured like we saw last year, or if he just, kind of coasts a little bit and Steph decides I'm going to flex this year, we've got KD now in the mix, he's up to speed, I can go back to sort of being the guy and taking more shots and having a bigger scoring number. I think a lot of people could easily view him as the best player on the best team. If they win 70, I think their best player should be the MVP. I think there's a pretty good chance that Steph's, lined up in that hole, and enough that I would bet on this.
Totally. That's why I did a double take when I saw 15-1. It's like, in a vacuum, I think Steph is probably the third or fourth best player in the NBA.
Well, I know exactly where he is on the list. It's coming Thursday.
Yeah, check Sports Illustrated on Thursday if you want a final answer on that one. But no, I think but like subjectively, I would put him 2 or maybe even 1, depending on the context. And I think anytime you have a chance to bet on a player who's that good with odds that are that favorable, I mean, like you kind of just do it.
Well, it jumps out too because you listed off Durant, LeBron, and Kawhi, and they were all basically the same, 5 or 6 to 1, and then you've got Steph as the one who's sort of way out there in the wilderness at 15 to 1, and that just seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think maybe it's a reflection, and maybe it's accurate to say that like Steph, because of the way his last 2 MVPs were received, I think both of them were controversial for different reasons. And I think because of that, there are people who would say that Steph is just not going to win another MVP because at this point now, everything he does comes with the Kevin Durant asterisk next to it. And I think there's also just like a lot of weird latent resentment toward him around the league. But even so, toward the end of last year, I think I told you, like, all things being equal, Steph is still, to me, the most valuable player in the league. He's more valuable to the Warriors than any other player is to their team.
Yeah, I know, and you're wrong a lot. Now, I was going to say, though, are we going to have a phenomenon where there's a correction here? Like, I don't know if you saw that article, like, Trump was the first white president, where Trump was, like, the guy who represented everything that Obama wasn't. Like, his presidency is a response completely to Obama's presidency. I'm wondering if Morey planting these seeds of like this MVP wasn't really about winning, it was about numbers, will spark a backlash because even though you don't want to admit it, he was right. The last MVP selections were not appropriately done when it comes to factoring in the weight of statistics versus the weight of team success. And so if we get to a situation where there is a leading candidate next year who's got a ton of team success, especially on the Warriors, if they're just running away from the league, there could be a scenario where there's just overwhelming pressure to give it to their guy because Steph we didn't last year.
Yeah, Steph is the linchpin for like the most dominant basketball machine that we've probably ever seen. Yeah. And it's not to say like Russ was crazy valuable last year, but it's just Steph's value happens at such a high level. And talking through this, maybe we're due for like a backlash to the backlash here. Yeah. I could see it. All right.
I'm also saying though that should make the 5 to 1 odds for KD pretty fair.
Yeah.
Pretty accurate. I think he has got a great shot to be the backlash to the backlash guy too because he comes off this amazing finals. He's got the buzz. At some point, if he continues to have some crazy season, we're going to really start getting into the like, has KD passed LeBron thing. I don't know if that's going to happen within this next season, but we're getting there.
I think we're at the point where the league is going to start orbiting around the Warriors. And sort of already does, but it's kind of going to become official this year, I think, where we're going to sort of transition into their 90s Bulls era. And at that point, KD, I mean, the basketball he played for the final 2 months of the playoffs was like basically flawless.
Yep.
And so we might come to a point where we're just rewarding him for playing basketball at like the highest level, some of the highest levels we've ever seen.
So there's a chance he could shake this role player tag.
Yeah, but that's by far the most boring preseason MVP pick you could make. What about Giannis at 10 to 1?
I like it, but he's only going to win it in that Westbrook mold. I would never. I shouldn't say I would never. I would have a very hard time envisioning myself making the case for Giannis as the MVP if the Bucks are like a 50-win team, right? Like, what's their best case scenario next year wins wise? 52?
Yeah, 52. And that's like seriously optimistic. But they could also end up like winning the top seed in the East with 52 wins.
Yeah. I would have a hard time. I mean, he's going to have unreal numbers.
It's
his
amazing.
Impact stats are going to be crazy, but there's a ceiling there. And in the East, too, it's even worse. Like, if Westbrook was in the Eastern Conference last year, I think there would be even more of a downgrading of his accomplishments because of just the weakness of the conference. Like, the fact that he was able to get them into a fairly respectable position in the West was pretty impressive to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer in Giannis, always have been. I do wonder whether we're jumping the gun a little bit in terms of his stardom.
Okay.
Like, I don't know if he should be a 10 to 1 favorite I don't know if he should have the same MVP odds as James Harden.
Well, Kobe disagrees. Kobe said your challenge this year on Twitter, he told Giannis to be the MVP.
Yeah. No, look, he's great.
He's floating it. Kobe Bryant, MVP legend, is floating it.
Good. Well, if you've got Kobe's endorsement, what more do you really need? I would worry about. I think people don't realize how crappy the Bucks supporting cast is.
Yeah, that is a good point.
And John Wall at 50-1 has about as good of a shot as Giannis at stealing it with like a torrid run through the East that sort of tricks people into getting too excited. And that's why the 10-1 odds for Giannis just doesn't really make sense for me. Like Wall and Giannis should be about the same at like 25-1.
I kind of feel like you're just setting this all up here so you can go back and pick LeBron or Kawhi. Is that what's about to happen?
It is. Hold on.
Oh, no. I knew it.
Kyrie also belongs in the conversation.
Dude.
I'm just saying we could absolutely see him average like 32 a game.
He
for
could
the
lead
Celtics.
the NBA in scoring.
Yes.
That does not make him the MVP.
So there may not be many alternatives though. If the Celtics go out and
the
win,
NBA is loaded.
They are loaded, but if the Celtics go out and win 56 games,
the Warriors could have 3 better MVP candidates if you count Draymond than Kyrie next year.
The narrative for Kyrie is going to be pretty compelling if he goes out and averages like 30 a game and wins 56 or 57 games for the Celtics.
Look,
that's going to be tough to beat. He's going to be in the mix.
I hate to say this, you have been swallowed up, brought into, under the wing of the Boston hype machine.
No,
yes.
I haven't.
This is your worst nightmare. You have become the person that you hate. Are you checking your text messages right now to see what Danny has to say?
It would be intellectually dishonest to deny the possibility of a big Kyrie year.
I
don't think it's going to happen. I wouldn't personally bet on it, but 25-1 odds is a decent number for him.
I don't think so. I think his ceiling is 5th.
Just
because if you don't play defense, I don't know how you get.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing that I was thinking about as I looked through all this is like after Westbrook's, Russ was sort of like the drunk choice last year, where everybody knew it was a bad decision, but we all kind of went through with it anyways.
You went to the walls for Westbrook for like 3 months in a row. Now you're gonna run away from it.
You constantly rewrite history on this podcast. It was literally the final month of the season where I started to come around on Russ while recognizing his flaws. But anyways, yes, I don't think this is a LeBron year. I don't. It just feels like it's going to be a weird year in Cleveland. I understand that it's setting up well for him to look like the most dominant player in basketball and keep the Cavs clicking without Isaiah for however many months. And like, so the narrative is there, but I also just think that we're going to spend half the year wondering what the hell he's going to do next summer. And I mean, to this point, he's been so cryptic about everything that he's sort of fueled all the speculation. And it's going to be hard for people to turn around and say, well, like, look at him sort of put that organization on his back.
Okay,
that's going to be tough. That's going to be a tough sell.
I think the argument for LeBron is he doesn't have the star pairing anymore. You know, Kevin Love and half of Isaiah Thomas is not what Kyrie was. You look at the Warriors, they're paired off, you know, in terms of Curry and Durant. I think Kawhi is always getting sort of knocked as being part of a system in a way that LeBron isn't in San Antonio. I think you look at the Rockets, they're paired off. The Thunder, their stars are now paired off. So it's setting up where he could have gigantic numbers. He will have gigantic numbers as always. He's not going to have to share the credit. If they're the 1 seed in the East, which is possible because the rest of these Eastern second-tier teams have kind of fallen back, he's a one-man show. Arguments are going to come through. There's going to be a strong case for he left 3 MVPs on the table over the years that he deserved to win that we overlooked. Let's do a makeup call MVP. I think there's also going to be a sense from him, judging by the intensity of his eyes and his eye contact during his Instagram videos this summer, that he's a man on a mission this year and that he wants to go out with a bang if this is his last year in Cleveland. I mean, he wants to be able to make his case next summer that I gave them everything I could, right?
Sure.
And that might be a disingenuous case. I mean, you could probably poke holes in it if you wanted to in terms of how he's conducted himself towards his teammates.
That's my
objection.
He
could go out and go crazy, and he could do, 28, 9 assists, 7 rebounds.
Yeah, I mean,
6 rebounds.
He's basically a walking triple-double at this point in his career.
So why isn't he in this mix?
Because I think that we're going to approach him with more skepticism than we did last year. Last year was sort of a victory lap for him where everyone was like, this is our Jordan. This is the best player walking the face of the earth. We all screwed up when we passed the torch to Steph last year. Let's just appreciate LeBron. Whereas now, I think there are more people around the league and even fans who look at this and say, it's kind of weird that Kyrie didn't want to play with him, and that's not entirely on Kyrie. Like, some of this is about LeBron, and that's part of the story too.
His ego gets brought back into it.
Yeah, and I mean, the Cavs literally, they have a Nets pick that they are terrified to trade because of LeBron and because they don't know what's going to happen. And the rest of the roster is aging because of short-term moves that LeBron has forced them to do over the last couple of years. All of which, a lot of which made sense at the time, but I think all that's going to get factored in, and it's just going to be kind of a bizarre year for the Cavs.
Could it also be a situation where they don't win enough? We never really say that about a LeBron team, but let's say they win 55. Is that enough? You know? Like, if you're only winning 55 or you win 52 and there's those up and down patches where he's not trying on defense and they look pretty sloppy for a couple weeks, he looks tired, he looks whatever it might be. Could that be a situation where you have so many other young guys in their prime leading teams that might, perform better wins losses in the Western Conference where that starts to count against him? He doesn't have that much help in Cleveland. He really doesn't.
Speaking of which, though, in retrospect, it's crazy that they only won 51 games last year.
Yeah.
As we look through the over-unders and everything, that Cavs team in that East only winning 51 is almost an accomplishment.
They had to try to lose.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And that is a strike against Kyrie and Kevin
I was
Love.
Just about to say it's amazing that they only won 51 with 2 MVP candidates in your eyes.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. And the final one, I really do think Kawhi's going to end up winning it.
Oh.
I think this is the year of Kawhi.
I did think it was coming back around to this. All right, make the case.
You know me too well. All right. So the Spurs are more short-handed than people realize. I mean, Tony Parker is going to be out half the year and is like a shell of his former self. LaMarcus Aldridge, not necessarily a shell of his former self, but not the same player he was a couple years ago.
He dropped on the top 100.
Yes,
to reflect that phenomenon.
Pau Gasol is. I still can't figure out why they gave Pau the deal that they did. Beyond that, though, I mean, they're counting on DeJounte Murray, guys like Danny Green. There's not a lot there. Whereas everyone else on this list, Russ at 9-1, James Harden at 10-1, the Warriors have 3 guys who are legit all-NBA players plus Clay. Everyone has a ton of help, and Kawhi doesn't. And I think that will help him in this race. And most importantly, I think he's kind of in that mix for best player in the league. The player we saw in the playoffs last year was the guy we saw through the middle 3 months of the season. He sort of tailed off at the end. Otherwise, I would have voted for him to win MVP last year. But he's incredible and carries them on offense. And if anything, he gets dinged because people say, hey, he's the best two-way player. And it doesn't focus enough on how dominant he's become offensively.
So you did come around to making some really good points in there, but you started off in just the worst possible way that you can break down the Spurs.
I like how we're just grading my arguments on this podcast.
Well, because I'm here, confronted with you face to face. No, you can't break the Spurs down into their individual components. Haven't you learned this? They're the greater than the whole of the sum of their parts.
Right.
You're never gonna be impressed by Pau Gasol individually, Danny Green individually, Patty Mills individually, Murray individually. But when you put them together, this is going to be a squad that wins a lot of games. And this is my point. You're right that he gets hit with the best two-way player, which is not the same as the best overall player. I mean, it's kind of like a shaded version of that. Yeah, and I think
he's quietly in that mix.
He is a top 5 all-around player, period.
Yeah, and he belongs.
He's there.
It's a good debate whether you'd take Kawhi or Kevin Durant.
I would still take Kevin Durant clearly, but he could prove that wrong this coming season, and that is how he would go towards winning the MVP. I think the way Kawhi is MVP is the Spurs are a top 2 team record-wise. That's in play. Houston may or may not work. Cleveland may come back to earth. Everybody else in the East might not work. That puts San Antonio sort of there in that spot by default. There could absolutely be Warriors fatigue. We don't know how that's going to play out. And there could also be a makeup call with Kawhi, which is, you look at the playoffs last year, your MVP, Westbrook, completely fell apart. My MVP, Harden, had a few struggles. And Kawhi looked very MVP-esque when he had that ankle injury and his team fell apart without him.
You know who was the big winner from this like batshit crazy NBA offseason?
Who's that?
James Harden. Because no one remembers how disastrous that final stretch of the Rockets Spurs series was.
It's coming back.
I don't know. It should have been a bigger story, but it's sort of things just got crazy and stayed crazy for about 2.5 months, and now Harden's Game 6 feels like it was 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think he's got some makeup MVP potential. Kawhi does. He's going to have a great team. He's going to have awesome numbers, and I also think he could get into this let's get it back to being about winning thing that we mentioned earlier. Kawhi is going to be about winning, one way or the other. And if his numbers continue to improve, Aldridge just kind of stays blah, Powell stays blah, and nobody else really breaks out for them, he's going to have even more of what was driving his case last year, which is like he's the only reason why they're doing it. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's a lot of just systematic stuff that helps them get to where they are in terms of the consistency of their defense, how they can plug and play role players in and maintain an elite team defense. But it will be a compelling case.
Yeah, and I would argue that the Spurs system and the supporting cast that they have there is crumbling more than people realize. And Kawhi is the guy who's kind of like holding it together with his bare hands. And the real case
crumbling.
For him,
that's a strong word
look,
for a
man,
dynasty.
Pau Gasol is crumbling. Tony Parker is crumbling. Manu is like 40 years old and has considered retirement a couple times.
They're only going to get 58 this year.
Exactly. That's the thing. They're still going to win 58.
Okay, so they're not crumbling. That's my point.
Because of Kawhi. The case for Kawhi is that he is one of the 4 best players, and he is going to have more opportunities to do things by himself than the other 3.
Definitely.
And LeBron is going to be recording cryptic Instagram videos all year.
I do think that LeBron will have a similar capacity to do that just because of the Isaiah injury. However, Kawhi has 0 baggage.
Yeah.
Like there's not really going to be a hater. There's no Kawhi haters. I don't know anybody who hates on Kawhi really.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on.
Except the hardcore Spurs fans who are still mad about the free throws he missed against the Heat in the finals. There are like 6 of them out there. Those are the only Kawhi haters. Otherwise, he enjoys basically near universal positive approval.
Spurs fans have had the best life of any sports fans in the last like 15 years. They don't get to complain about anything.
Well, I'm glad they could get that in before their team crumbles.
All right, so we have a couple other things to hit today. We've got mailbag questions, which we'll save for the end. We've got lottery reform, and we've got Steph and KD shoe wars. And we also have a meeting in about 25 or 30 minutes, so we should hurry. What do you want to talk about first?
The sneaker wars.
Okay.
Under Armour versus Nike. Can you just quickly summarize who popped shots at whom and what basically the framework of this battlefield is?
I can give you a good amateur summary because I didn't prepare as much as I should have, so I don't have the exact quotes in front of me.
Okay.
But KD came out and said kids don't want to play in Under Armour or something like that on the Bill Simmons podcast. And people took note. And people were like, look, that's Steph's company. Steph is basically like on the board at Under Armour.
No, and I think in his comment that KD made, Steph was like brought up. Like it was the discussion was not just about Bill, Under Armour, the brand. It was sort of like about Steph and Under Armour and all that.
Yeah, I think Bill came back and was like, that's Steph's company.
Yeah.
But anyways, so fast forward a week and Steph commented and said, that's KD's opinion. I talked to him. I reached out to him. We worked it out. It's not a thing. But that's not been my experience with Under Armour. Yeah. And then I mentioned this today, and you were like, "I've got some takes on Under Armour."
I do have a lot of hot takes
and their relationship to America.
Well, because here's the thing, I relate to KD because when he said that, I nodded vigorously because he's basically saying like, in no world would he ever or could he conceive of kids ever wearing Under Armour. I have never worn a pair of Under Armour shoes in my life, and I doubt I ever will. Granted, I was born in Beaverton, Oregon, sort of in the shadow
you're
of
a child of Phil Knight.
Nike's world headquarters sort of like, hung over my high school, basically. But there are a lot of people like that. I'm not that much older than KD. There is a whole generation of people who only knew when Nikes and Jordans were cool.
Uh-huh.
Like even back then, Adidas was not cool. Like the crazy, remember the Kobe shoes, the slippers, the big tubas or whatever you want to call those?
The only pair of Adidas
Submarines.
I ever owned growing up were the T-Max shoes.
Yeah.
And those were cool for a couple years.
And the Question had 1 year. Reebok had one shoe.
And those were great shoes, though.
But we even looked at sideways at people who wore the Questions, and those were dope shoes. And Iverson was the biggest star, basically, for a very short stretch there on the planet. He was the coolest guy.
Reebok also spent the next 20 years re-releasing the Questions.
In every gradient.
Yeah, exactly.
They went through the whole Crayola box. So I am kind of with KD, but this is where my mind went, because not too long ago, as you know, I was kind of doing a road trip through America. And I got up to North Dakota, and man, they love cheese curds. Are just like the thing up there. They put cheese curds. You can just get a package of them in the stores. They'll have them everywhere. I had never eaten a cheese curd probably in my first 25 years of my life. Didn't even know what they were. And I actually felt the same way about this when I was in the southwest of the United States a few years ago when I first came across Takis. Because I bought a bag of Takis, and I was like, well, that song Hot Cheetos and Takis makes a lot more sense now. Like, I finally get it. These are pretty good. So I had cheese curds, had the poutine. That's pretty good. I understand why these people...
Are you comparing Under Armour shoes to cheese curds?
I understand why these people love cheese curds. I understand why they're all over the grocery stores. I understand why they're on every single menu. These people have discovered something. Cheese curds are pretty dope.
First of all, cheese curds are amazing, and one of the best parts about going to the Midwest is an excuse to eat cheese curds. Because I would if they had cheese curds in DC, I would feel kind of guilty because they're really bad for you.
Yeah.
But whenever I go to the Midwest, it's like when in Rome, they gotta get the cheese curds.
Bingo.
But cheese curds are great, and Under Armour shoes are pretty awful.
So I think
we should be upfront about that.
Well, I think for a certain segment of the population, it could just be Chinese fans, it could be younger fans who just love Steph and they're all about Steph and they're treating his shoes like generations of people treated Jordan's shoes, even if they're maybe not aesthetically on the same level. I think for a certain subgroup of people, Under Armour is dope like cheese curds are dope. And I think that's where Steph's coming from. And I don't think that unless you take KD to whatever the equivalent of North Dakota is and say, here's this whole other universe of people who love Under Armour and are totally about it, and everything you've known about Nike for your entire life, there's this alternate reality. I'm not sure you can ever bridge that gap. How do you do it? How do you teach him? If you, like you're saying, if you just ate cheese curds in DC, you're like, oh, this is unhealthy and gross. I'm not really down with it. If I had just had one when I was a kid in Oregon when I could have had the opportunity just to eat a peanut butter taco like I normally did, I'm never going to be eating a cheese curd, right? I don't know how you bridge this divide. This seems like a pretty real thing.
I cannot believe how sincere you are about the cheese curd analogy, but I will just say this, that I too am a child of Nike, just like you, and grew up thinking that every other sneaker brand was lame.
Yes.
So I understand what he's saying, and again, I'm still not really into Under Armour shoes, although the designs have gotten better, but they're still not something I would ever buy.
Yeah. But people do buy them. I think that's the reality for me was I didn't even know cheese curds was a thing. It actually is a thing. And like KD, we don't know Under Armour is a thing, but I think what Steph is saying is he's correct.
Yeah.
It's a thing. It really is a thing.
Well, and Under Armour's been very smart about their grassroots growth.
Yeah.
Their strategy is to take over high school level basketball and then grow from there. And they've done a nice job thus far. And Steph's point was look, if you look at where Under Armour shoes were 4 years ago versus where they are now, the growth is crazy. And that's true too. But I think, again, it goes back to KD saying that basketball first and last will always be about buckets. I agree with the message. Mm-hmm. The messenger is still a little suspect to me, particularly in this case, because everyone knows that Under Armour is Steph. They are inseparable at this point. You don't take shots at Under Armour. It's Steph's team, and it's like a respect issue. Imagine someone on the Cavs taking shots at Nike.
Yeah.
And they would never do it because it's LeBron's
Kevin Love's
company.
In his Chinese shoes that nobody's ever heard of. He's just that swoosh is old. That's late.
It wouldn't happen. And I'm not saying it doesn't have to be a bigger thing, but it is symptomatic of a larger disregard for Steph that has happened among superstars all over the NBA, and even with KD, and it's just bullshit. Like, you can go back to Steve Kerr saying that KD was the most valuable player, and like,
he was though.
Like, I'm just sick of it, man. None of this would happen in Golden State without Steph, and it's getting old. And I hope that at some point Steph just like flips out, but he won't.
Well, I do kind of wonder though, because you're basically saying Under Armour is Steph, Steph is Under Armour.
Yeah.
But I think there's also some other layers here, and I don't know if this is what Katie was getting at. I don't think it was. But I don't necessarily only associate them. Like, I associate like the head of Under Armour, like kind of the weird politics guy. I also bring in lacrosse. Like, there's a lot of other things I associate with Under Armour.
A DMV icon, so tread carefully here.
Yeah. Oh, you're still claiming him?
I don't know.
You better not be claiming him. I'm going to disown you just like KD disowned Steph.
Sure.
No, I think that there's other layers to the Under Armour universe besides just Steph. And I don't think those other layers are really that cool to basketball players. Like, I think, like, for you and me, maybe you could wear an Under Armour shirt to the gym, and I think a lot of basketball players, like, you know, those tech shirts or whatever that they wear, you know, Under Armour made and kind of got famous from. Like, I'm not sure everyone views that side of Under Armour's branding as cool.
Yeah,
and I think especially basketball players are sort of like, Nike is a basketball brand, Under Armour is this sort of like performance lacrosse non-basketball brand, you know?
Yeah, I think if anything, this is just another reason to appreciate Steph, because I think another player, like, but seriously, if this did happen with LeBron, it would be a thing. Instead, this is just a non-issue that we're blowing out of proportion in September.
Steph handled it beautifully.
Steph is probably fine. He probably spent the summer.
He's probably
going
pissed,
to
though.
weddings.
Hold on.
And
don't you think deep down he's a lot more angry about that? Like, that is a personal shot. Are we just going to assume Steph doesn't take
that's
that
the thing.
personal?
I would like to see some backbone from him.
Oh.
I think that's
Too
my
political.
goal for Steph is for him to clap back at some of these people who take shots. Well, it doesn't have to be KD.
Oh, that'd be great.
But every week someone around the league is taking a passive aggressive shot at Steph Curry.
Do you think that training camp rolls around, all the coaches, all the front office members, ownership, the diehard fan club guys, and the season ticket holders, they all just have huge free sponsored bags of Under Armour gear, courtesy of Steph, where he's just trying to flex kind of quietly. Yeah, KD's like left out of it. The other Nike athletes on the team are left out of it, but Steph just tries to send a message. It's like, this is an Under Armour town.
I just hope.
Wouldn't you do that if you were him?
I hope Clay has his corner of Anta swag as Switzerland in all this.
I'm picturing Steph coming out opening night in the new Nike jerseys, and KD kind of making a point after the game to say that Steph looked really good in his jersey.
Speaking of KD, one last note on shoes. He released some new colorway, I guess, of his KD 10s today, and the foot of the shoe, or the sole of the shoe, excuse me, has all sorts of things that he was called. So I'm reading here. Lame, doesn't care about fans, cheat code, he's changed, weak follower, quitter, blew a 3-1 lead, soft, snake, super team,
So they
can't
just
beat him,
transcribed
join him.
what you said from basically November through March about KD, and they put it right onto the shoe.
This continues KD playing the victim card, which is bad luck. But yes, I'm really disappointed that they didn't have role player in
Hashtag role.
Big red script. Alas, we'll add that to our KDs. Nike sent us a free pair.
Is it cool to kind of co-opt your criticism? That's a popular technique now among famous people. I'm not sure it's actually cool, though.
What does that mean?
Like, he's taking the criticism, he's owning it, and he's trying to show you how much more important and clear-eyed he is than you by
you know what this
putting
is?
what you've said about him on his shoe and then putting his own accomplishments on top of it.
This is a case of doth protest too much.
Yeah.
Okay. If he was really that cool with this and really had nothing to apologize for and wasn't mad, then there wouldn't, like, when LeBron won his title in Miami, he didn't spend the entire summer answering the haters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why this is a weird look from KD.
It's like he's telling you, I swear I don't care, but then he's wearing a T-shirt that says, I care a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Quickly on lottery reform, do you have an opinion? I think we should probably wait until this becomes real, if it becomes real. But do you have a take?
I have never thought the lottery is broken. I think it's one of the most exciting and weird things about the sport. I remember when people were proposing the wheel, like
Yeah.
the 20. That was the stupidest thing to me because you have to explain to someone for like an hour how your proposal is going to work. It's broken.
Yeah.
It already just failed the test, right? So simpler to me is better. I kind of get what they're trying to do, which is de-incentivizing the race to the absolute bottom. That does make some sense to me. I just don't think it's going to make that big of a difference, and I don't think it's broken.
Yeah, I don't think it makes that much of a difference either. Although I do think that if they're going to just if they switch the odds up, they're going to change the section of the league that's tanking.
Okay.
So if let's say the top 5 teams all have an equal shot at number 1, then 6 through 10 are going to tank extra hard for that final month, and it's gonna have strange unintended consequences in terms of which teams are resting guys and sort of mailing it in. And the bigger issue for me with this is that I just don't. It makes me worried that the league doesn't understand why the NBA is popular.
Okay.
Because I think that there's a large segment of fans who find that race to the bottom and planning for the future interesting. And granted, when you take it to the extreme with the process and it stretches into like a 4-year span, you begin to sabotage like actual lottery picks, and it could screw with like the guys you actually are trying to develop. So that's problematic. But as far as like on a one-off basis, tanking can be fascinating and fun to follow for teams that would otherwise be crappy and would leave fans completely apathetic.
Yeah, you're selling wins, you're selling hope. And so if you're muddying how hope gets sold for those teams that aren't really in the mix, then do their fans just kind of tune out even more because they're like, we're pretty much one of the bottom 5 teams, whatever, instead of saying, oh, if we lose 3 more games this week, we can have like 5% more chance to get the best player, right?
Exactly. And if you're trying to level the playing field, I don't think you're going to really accomplish all that much because you look at teams in the middle, like the Pistons the last few years.
Well, and it's still a lottery. I mean, we still had the Bulls get Derrick Rose, out of absolutely nowhere. And so, I don't think it matters that much either. It's just...
I won't get worked up about it because knowing the NBA and knowing NBA writers and NBA fans, like we'll find a way to have fun with anything.
Yeah.
But I do think I question the motives behind this. I don't know whether this is just window dressing and they feel the need to like
PR,
take some action to say that they've done that. But it doesn't strike me as a real problem that needs solving.
I think we need to ramp up the public shaming aspect down the stretch. I really think that as media,
I think you should take that on yourself.
Well, I have
tried.
Your goal. Look, I have tried. I'm trying to rope you in because don't you think that we tend to tune out a whole heck of a lot of teams every single year, and that this conversation has been driven far too much by a response to Philadelphia in particular, when there's a lot of other bad teams out there that are skating by, whether we want to call them Phoenix, Orlando, Brooklyn. I mean, there's been a lot of teams that have been bad for a really long time, right? But all anyone ever wants to talk about is the process. I think if we did a better job of painting how miserable all these situations were over the course of the entire year, we might be able to shame their executives either into getting fired or into getting better, because they're allowed to just kind of suck quietly, for lack of a better phrasing, and that's, there's not really the incentive there.
Yeah, I would be more in favor of shaming them if there were better alternatives that they were turning away from. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as if Brooklyn or Phoenix or any of the teams at the bottom are like turning down playoff spots to be at the bottom. And again, I think the Pistons are just the ultimate, like, let's compete cautionary tale because nobody wants to watch a 30-win team that like has no shot at doing anything. So, anyways, we'll come back to that when the NBA passes it, which it sounds like it could happen. But couple questions at the end here. Moses says, love the Westbrook doomsday scenario. It's very real for me.
Hold on. We get 20 emails saying Andrew's off his rocker. He's lost his mind. about your crazy Westbrook and Paul George to the Cavaliers trade, and you're going to include the one email that liked it?
We got a couple pro, and we got a couple who were skeptical.
And I'm the person who rewrites it. Okay.
All right. Moses says, I love the Westbrook doomsday scenario. It's very real to me, but I have a question you guys danced around but didn't ask. If Russ and PG aren't working together in OKC, why are the Cavs lining up to pay for an obviously dysfunctional duo?
Good point. I hadn't even actually considered your trade enough to poke obvious holes in it.
It's a good point. However, I think that in my far-fetched scenario, it involves, I think, ultimately, if you're Cleveland and you're willing to deal that Nets pick, you're just going to bet on talent.
LeBron fixes everything, right?
LeBron fixes everything.
Okay.
I think the biggest reason this trade wouldn't happen, among dozens of reasons this trade wouldn't happen, is that the optics of trading Paul George and Russell Westbrook to Cleveland would be so bad for OKC and maybe so bad for the NBA in general that I could see Silver stepping in and I could see Presti not pulling the trigger just because it would look that bad and make small markets, in particular OKC, look that hopeless. Having said that, my only point is that there's a non-zero chance if Russ does not sign that extension, there's a non-zero chance that he becomes tradable, in which case that Nets pick is going to be as good of a return as they're going to get for him.
Okay.
All right. Good. Flipping things around, though. Hamid.
I love the standard is just non-zero chance now. That's all we're going for.
I was never saying it was likely. I was saying we should all be rooting for it. We should root for the Thunder to stumble the first couple of months. Hamid says, let's say the Pelicans aren't doing great before the trade deadline.
Very likely. Non-zero chance that happens.
And let's say the Thunder offer Steven Adams and Enes Kanter for DeMarcus Cousins. Maybe a draft pick, too. Doesn't this help both teams?
I'd rather have Steven Adams than DeMarcus Cousins from the Thunder.
Really?
As currently constructed, yeah.
I think you got to go talent. If you're looking to take down the Warriors, you have a higher ceiling. Granted, you have a lower floor with Cousins, but you have a higher ceiling with him on board. And I would love it as a crazed all-in bet where all three of those guys could leave at the end of the year, but it would make a little bit of sense.
I like the idea of having more scoring potential around Westbrook so he doesn't have to do nearly as much as he did last year.
You just don't trust him to actually give it up?
I do actually kind of trust him to not do as much as he did last year because no one else has ever done in the history of the NBA usage-wise what Westbrook did last year, so the odds are he's going to be doing less next year and every year for the rest of his career. I just don't know if I want to recirculate all those possessions or as many possessions as it takes to keep Cousins happy to Cousins. I don't like that balance, that duo.
Yeah. I like that landing spot a lot more than trying to get DeMarcus Cousins onto the Cavs. Although I think the sleeping giant in all this is Houston, because they're the team, especially if they don't get Melo, they're the team that should be gunning for Boogie, because Morey will always bet on talent versus fit.
That is true.
And they, they're one star away from really being compelling as a threat.
Yeah, and they don't have that much to lose either.
Exactly.
I think whoever gets Cousins is either going to be the most desperate GM in the league at that moment or the guy who has the least to lose. I think it's going to happen on one of those polls.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just so easy to talk yourself out of him, especially after the way the first couple months went in New Orleans.
I wonder, if you went around the league, I bet there are more than 20 teams who are just out on Boogie at any price.
And spoiler alert, we had to drop in the top 100 because of that. I mean, I think he really doesn't make his teammates better, and I think you really have to question whether he's ever going to get it. And I think there's a whole lot of teams. You have to have a really precise kind of composite of factors to have him make sense for you.
Yeah. All right. Couple more questions here.
And desperation is usually at the very top of that list.
Yeah, well, we're only a couple months away from me putting on a full-on campaign to get DeMarcus Cousins to DC. So look forward to that, everyone. Steven says, I've been perplexed by the elasticity of opinions on coaches. 1 year, D'Antoni sucks and has no ability to relate to superstars, and the next, he's a revolutionary mind and coach of the year. In your opinion, who are the top 3 coaches whose reputation is most incorrect?
Well, one thing I'd say about the D'Antoni is that he is making a good point, but I do think that D'Antoni's reputation still is that his style doesn't work in the playoffs.
Yes.
That was validated last year. I mean, as much as you want to kill Harden for his performance in Game 6, I mean, he got...
They both took some hits.
He got completely worked by Popovich, unsurprisingly, right?
Yeah.
And
I still think he's a good coach, though.
I think he's a good coach, too. Usually, I think his point is the truth's probably somewhere in the middle between these two crazy polls about, D'Antoni's reputation. And I think his point is accurate, but I also think that usually coaches are judged by their performance in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And D'Antoni is accurately judged for his ability to really never get anywhere in the playoffs.
My answer would be Jeff Hornacek. Has really only had 4 good months with the Suns and has parlayed that into multiple contracts. And still people sort of talk about him as though he's a good coach, and I'm not sure there's really any evidence.
Well, the same guy who hired Hornacek the second time around was the same guy who gave Noah $70+ million and traded for Derrick Rose.
I'm not talking. I'm saying NBA writers talk about Hornacek as though he's a good coach. Frank Vogel is another one who, even when he was fired from Indiana, there was a media-wide mourning for him when there's not a lot of evidence that he's that far above average. And we're sort of seeing that in Orlando as well. Let's see. Well, Doc Rivers is tough.
I was going to say where you're going with this is you're pointing out that the number one bias in terms of perception of coaches is who is the most skilled at working the local media.
Yes.
And I think
or national media.
Being friendly, remembering people's names. The coaches love to play the game where they name check the reporters in press conferences. That goes a long way. That's probably 60% of where they get their reputation from is just being able to say hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
And then I also think
it's a great point.
I think that's a big part of it. And then I also think if you're convincing, if you can show your emotions like a Stan Van Gundy, and you just are so sick of Reggie Jackson and you're willing on record to just flip out about him, people will give you points for that. It's
totally.
He's honest. He just wears his heart on his sleeve. He's got to be a good coach. That's how he is in the locker room too. I think that's a big part of it. I wouldn't get too lost in this discussion though.
Yeah. I think Doc Rivers is a guy who is overrated by casual fans, and people, I think hardcore fans call him overrated so often that he's almost become underrated. I think he's a solid coach. He's not brilliant, but he's not a train wreck either. But I think the reality with NBA coaches is that really there are 3 or 4 great coaches, and then 20 or 25 guys in the middle, and then
Hoiberg.
2 or 3 train wrecks.
No,
Hoiberg, Whitman, all the heavy hitters at the bottom. But yeah, I think most guys are just pretty solid and generally not solid enough to make up for disastrous rosters. So, last 2 questions here. George, he says, is Furkan Korkmaz the greatest name in NBA history? And is Andrew the Draymond of podcasting? Really valuable when he's good, total train wreck when he's bad. Look, I'm just...
Yeah, you have been bringing some Olympic team Draymond to the microphone here the last couple weeks.
This has been... I'll take it, okay? I will take that.
You should. Draymond's incredible.
Draymond is a big upgrade over Kyrie and LaMarcus Aldridge, my previous 2 player comps. And Furkan, I'm really excited for Furkan to make his NBA debut. I think it's happening this year. He looked good at the Euros the past few weeks. And he's a guy that I was irrationally excited about coming into the draft. So,
That's very on brand of you.
Yeah, totally. Last question, and I'm including this more as a question to listeners. Was thinking about this in the frame of fantasy, but also legitimately curious because counting stats get used a lot as evidence of regression, etc. Who is the most likely to drop off numbers-wise this year? Harden and Westbrook are both going to see their usage going down. And then who are the guys who are going to jump up? Kyrie is a serious candidate in Boston. What do you guys think? That's from Jonathan. So the reason I asked this question is because I want to do a fantasy basketball preview, and Ben hates fantasy basketball.
I boycott fantasy basketball.
With
I don't
the fire of 1,000
No, because it
suns.
distorts your opinions. I mean, it's very clear to me, how much you like bucket getters because of how many points they've won you, how much money they've won you over the course of the year for, your fantasy teams.
Will there be an audience? If you would be interested in a fantasy basketball preview, and we'll answer Jonathan's question on there, get in touch, because if so, if I have a little coalition to bring to Golliver, I can force him to do it. He refused to do it last year, but I think it could be fun. And I think Kyrie is going to be a top 5 guy in fantasy this year, to answer his question about jumps.
Yeah, that's a good sleeper pick. It's great advice. I'm sure nobody would have figured that out.
I didn't take the train up here to get abused all week, so we're going to need to work on this before the top 100.
I have boycotted for my entire life fantasy, and I could have told you that Kyrie is a good guy to pick. I don't even know how it works.
Look forward to more insights like that on the fantasy preview.
Great deep cuts from the Open Floor NBA fantasy preview.
All right, well, we got to go, but we will be back later in the week to talk through the top 100, the Pentagon Papers of Sports Illustrated.
Maybe some more cheese curd.
Yes, here we go. So look forward to that. Check back later in the week. And 5-star reviews on iTunes.
Fantasy guys to check out. What about Tobias Harris and Rodney Hood?
Yeah. Hey, Rodney Hood could be big this year.
Tobias Harris could lead the Pistons in scoring.
No, never put any faith in Tobias Harris. But yes, openfloormail@gmail.com. If you like the pod, hit us with a 5-star review on iTunes, and we'll be back soon.
And that's my job. 5-star reviews on iTunes, openfloormail@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out my Instagram. It's blowing up. We're having some great art criticism debates on there, fueled by Andrew's interesting perspectives on photography. Talk to you soon, Andrew.